And I'd be looking for a first and a second motion to approve the items. What's the motion?
I'll second it.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. And then we go on to our personnel report. And again, I would be looking for a motion in a second.
Motion.
Okay, any discussion at all? Okay, all those in favor, motion by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, and then we have some out-of-state travel that was presented to the curriculum committee on February 23rd. And if it's okay with everyone, I'd like to take all those together. There was one that was science, chemistry, education going to Ontario, world language, French impression going to the Chicago Art Institute and French Market, and the Central State Swim Coach Clinic, boys and girls JV and varsity swimmers in Oak Brook, Illinois.
I just want to make a comment. They're not
Yes.
just going to Ontario. They're going to Guelph, Ontario, where my father and my parents used to live and where my brother still lives, which is got a wonderful, beautiful university.
Neat.
It's a great town. So, I was all in favor of adding to the
They were saying,
income of the city of Guelph by
Yeah.
voting for this.
they were saying that there wasn't that much out there for swimming, so that this was a kind of a neat adventure that they could go on.
No, this is for the chemistry. This is
Oh, the
for
chemistry one.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right, neat.
Actually, can I add to that?
Yeah, sure.
The first two to mention for those of you who weren't there is the chemistry they're actually presenting
Yeah,
at the
yeah.
conference.
I was really impressed.
And then the Chicago Art Institute and French Market, they're also including the French 5 and 6 students because they didn't have the opportunities to do that in the past because of COVID.
Yeah.
So that was just something I wanted to add to this. The additional students going to them.
So we have a motion and a second already out of the committee. Any other further discussion or comments? Okay, all in favor of the out-of-state travel, vote by, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, great. And then we have to talk about 8 new SFA coordinator positions, and I'll let Jamie and Mike talk about those.
And I'll defer to Jane.
Okay.
So the 8 SFA coordinator positions, one for each site. The coordinator's responsibility is really to take a look at all student information and to be able to program for students. It's also to pull materials to give to teachers and to use the data to define what interventions are needed for each individual student. It is a key component of being able to implement SFA for each of the sites, and it will be a tremendous support for the teachers and the children that are at the schools.
Great. I'd be looking for a motion in a second.
Make a motion.
I'll second.
Okay.
So a couple questions as far as the funding for it. How are these going to be funded? The amount that is allocated for these positions, and then also, is there going to be a sunset to these positions, or are these going to be a continual?
Those are a continual position that's there as long as you are implementing SFA. It's a key position to make sure that we are using data to drive all our decisions. The funding will come from general fund, only because you can't use title funding and then place it in buildings that don't have title funding. That's called supplanting. That's not an allowable use of money. So it would be general fund. I'm going to say at the end of the day, it will be kind of a almost a break even, because we will look at all the positions within the buildings to see which ones are needed and which ones may be sunsetting.
What's the unit price here? How much are these positions being,
No, I didn't see it in there.
Great question. So the position is paid at a teacher's salary
okay.
plus a stipend of, I believe we said 5%. We
Okay.
have added 10 days for the calendar year so that they can get ready for students when they're incoming. That's paid at a diem.
Okay.
Okay.
Next to the principal as an instructional leader, this will be a significant role. And it's my understanding that a number of individuals have expressed interest, even though we will go through a process of selecting, really strong candidates for this, because not only where you need to be a strong instructional teacher, data analysis, and also your relationship with your peers, and it will be also very beneficial.
Stacy, help me out here. I'm getting
Sure.
old, and
Yes.
and sometimes think, oh God, I forgot this, I forgot that.
Yeah.
Sometimes I wonder, if I'm missing, parts of my life. I don't recall we ever took this up in the personnel committee.
No, we do not.
Why not?
Well, I suggested, since it was going to be a topic that we would all discuss, that we would just move it forward to
okay.
kind of the committee of the whole rather than just personnel.
Okay.
So, can you say it again? You said, and obviously it's an estimate, but a net zero maybe, because you have to evaluate the positions that we have now, the needs where we are. But you did say your goal or your kind of estimate is that it would be a net zero of losing professionals and then fulfilling this position requirement?
That will be the goal.
That would be
Yes.
the goal. Okay, thank you very much.
So my question is, the very people that we're hiring for these spots, then they are no longer going to be teaching in the classroom, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
That'll probably be the hardest part of the people who are expressing interest, is they will not have that day-to-day teaching with students. They also will not be running intervention groups. They will be teachers of teachers.
Any other questions?
Yeah,
Go ahead first.
so it sounds to me, if I'm hearing you guys right, then this is critical for SFA to be successful. And in the long run, we feel that we can get this to be a cost neutral impact for as close to it as possible for the district.
Correct.
As far as the position, I remember we were, so if they're gonna be teachers of teachers, then, one of the things that we've had similar similar positions like this that had done teaching and coaching of professionals. How is there going to be like more meetings then that they're going to be expecting the teachers to attend and stuff, or is it going to be pretty much coordination, and they're going to be coordinating that professional development aspects? I mean, I'm trying to get my head
Right,
around
that's a great question. So yes, and they will also be delivering professional development within the classroom, side by side with the teacher when the data suggests it's needed.
Okay. So it's not gonna be like, it won't be that they're gonna be, during sixth period, they're gonna be expected to go and have a one-on-one or something like
No.
this, okay?
No, what's really important to emphasize here is the data management piece. And it's taking a look at your entire scope of children to say, what child needs what intervention, or what classroom are they best suited for? The other thing that I think for the teaching staff is they actually pull the materials and they prep the materials for the teachers. So when
So
you
they're
come
helping in the
in,
prep work or the prepping for the
Yeah.
day-to-day.
so when you come in as a teacher, you have 16 children that you might be working with. My materials are right here.
I think it'd be a real asset,
All right.
especially with having so many new teachers.
They're gonna take a load off of them too, a little bit.
Yeah.
It does take a load off of them. It also makes sure that they have the right materials for the specific targeted instruction that they need.
I just love this, sorry to interrupt, but assist substitute teachers with the reading and math as well. It's like that huge stopgap. This is amazing that we're actually seeing, the idea is to see that we can, solve the problems. I mean, this is a proactive problem-solving position, 100% through and through, to be able to see the problems as they come or before, and then like Jamie just said, to have the materials ready for the teachers that are in there. So it seems like a very intricate position that's going to be needed at every facility.
I would also like to highlight what we're doing also is we're moving a lot of the instructional leadership role from central office into the schools. This is putting the structure. SFA is very much a distributive leadership process. It engages everybody, in some form of committee structure. This individual as well as the principal are key to quarterly review sessions where they're looking at the data and examining how students have progressed or not, so that it's an analysis of all the students
Mhm.
with the whole school. And the various components that influence instruction or attendance. And so it's and when I say quarterly, there are monthly, daily, information that is fed into collecting this data, to be able to monitor and adjust. And again, because of those 90-minute reading blocks, you're breaking, kids down into, for a teacher to have a narrow, range of abilities, so that again, they can leverage that time to try to get kids up to the next highest level. So it's,
Thanks, Jim. Can you speak to, from the board level, what can we expect to see from this new data collection?
well, I think it'll be very informative, because one of the things that you may have recalled reporting out before is how we're not using data now, right? And that there's inconsistency from school to school. So now you're going to start seeing consistency in terms of what we're using to review, and how that's informing our instruction. So you quite often sometimes will hear the importance of data-driven instruction. Where data is informing, where are kids making it, where are they not, at what level. And so the SFA also has a data management system that's all part of this.
So can I
Yeah,
piggyback on
please.
that? Okay, so what you will see is where students are in their instruction and what gains they're making from one point to the next. But that's not the only data that you should be looking for. You're also going to be looking for the state assessments. You're going to be looking for any other type of assessment that we give. We'll be tracking that. That won't necessarily be housed within that SFA component for data, but we're going to make sure that that's accessible to you, because you have to have at least 3 points of data to make good decisions.
I'm just helping out with this. Are these kids gonna be like tested all the time?
No, a lot of the information is gathered during their activities that's
Okay.
going on.
Yeah, like some of the things that I really like that I'm doing are, first of all, that coverage single student will be looked at many times a year, because a lot of
Yeah.
times there are kids who fall through the cracks. And I love the word that you use, Jim, of adjustment. So it says to me that we're not just plugging somebody in someplace, not looking at them and then staying there. So I really like that idea. And of course, as a former substitute teacher, I see the value in having someone who oversees those teachers coming in and is supporting them so that they continue the work of SFA, not just, sometimes because I had subbed art for so long, I was able to actually teach what the teacher had been teaching, right? But then there's always that time where you have those like, okay, today we're gonna draw a sub sandwich, you know what I mean? So I like the idea that there's more consistent teaching instead of just having kind of that downtime. And then the last thing that really sticks out in my mind in here is, because we've talked about some of this even in our ad hoc committee, is recruitment tutors or mentoring. I think that can do so much for our kids. So I know that you're probably talking more about math or reading, but are we talking, when we say recruitment, is this from outside or students from within? Like when we talk about tutors, what are you referring to?
So that's not necessarily this particular role. That's going to also be, there's an SFA solutions coordinator that helps with all of the mentors. So yes, it is from outside. It is
Okay.
also from internal.
Okay.
And the mentors or the tutors can be anywhere from like a behavioral type of thing, like working with attendance with a child or supporting a family, to reading or math or another subject specific area.
I love that, because we've talked quite a bit as a committee too about that our kids are being raised on by a community and bringing them in and having help from other areas, that we just can't do this alone. So that gets me excited to hear some of that, because we've gotten away from that in education. For so long, we were afraid to bring people in from the outside into our buildings, thinking about safety, but there's other ways to handle that. So I'm excited to see what turn for that, because I know it's done a lot for a lot of kids.
There was one in here, the component meetings that I was questionable about is, I know the biggest reason that I have a concern about there is we had talked, when we were speaking with MEA, we had said that we were really wanting to make sure that we were taking stuff off the teacher's plate. And so that is actually a very strong thing that I want to make sure that we're doing. The component meetings, can you help me understand what those look like and what it is that they're doing there? It says the whole two component meetings 2 times per month. What is that?
So I'm not exactly sure. I want to answer it with what I believe that it is, but then I'm going to redefine that later if I find out that that's not a component meeting.
Okay.
Okay, so I believe what that means is that they'll take a look at all of the data that's collected regarding the students in their reading, and then they'll determine what components of reading need to be retaught.
Okay.
I believe that's what that means.
So that's not like where they're holding meetings with the teachers and that they're gonna have to attend all these, it's not extra meetings for teachers that are gonna have
No.
to take place.
No.
Okay. Thank
The
you.
meetings with teachers will probably be very similar to what we do now, which is a PLC meeting.
Mhm.
So that would be more of the instructional piece from this person leading types of meetings.
Okay.
But our goal is to, one, at the elementary level anyway, we want to give them more planning time, and we want to take some of the planning off of their plates.
I would also add, because I think SFA is so comprehensive in terms of covers so many areas that are important for teacher development and for student learning, that there, I believe, is an opportunity for us to really look at the possibility of moving away from the state system that we're using currently through CESA 6. If in fact we can leverage what we are having to do, to help our teachers grow, our monitoring students, all those important, so that we aren't now having to do something else to satisfy a reporting requirement that we're developing our teachers and holding them accountable. Evaluation systems. So, my sense, it's more of a compliance model than it is a development model. Even though it's packed with research, it's very time consuming.
We get a lot of complaints about that.
But
The teacher effectiveness
Teacher effectiveness, yeah,
program that we use here. A lot of teachers feel that it's,
a waste of time.
Now, there's a lot of research in there, but that research is with an SFA. That same stuff that we're attempting to do, somewhat removed, and asking people, how do we take advantage of what we're already doing when it's meeting those same requirements to get the state to see what we're doing, so that we're making better use of teachers' time to accomplish the same thing, but in a more effective way.
Tony,
So if I'm hearing you right, then it sounds like in lieu of the one time a year report card we get from the state, this is actually going to give us a tool that will allow us to measure our progress incrementally. Is that a fair statement?
And make changes immediately.
That's awesome.
That's great.
Yes.
That's the dashboard I was talking about.
Tony, it only took
Tony likes it.
11 months.
Always the dashboard.
This is great. Oh, this is awesome. And that's gonna be a great tool, and if there's a way to, as we get that system built, it'll be a great way to hold ourselves accountable, but if there's a way to increase the transparency, to the public, so see how we're doing, I think that would be a great tool to.
It's challenging when you're going in, there's so much information to learn, and not to overwhelm us by, throwing stuff out there, but there's also a significant dashboard that SFA uses working with their districts in terms of implementing this over a 3-year period of time. What's the most important things to be doing first? And it's essentially measuring that. It's measuring, what percentage of your teachers are exhibiting this, this component of teaching.
Yeah.
So I mean, there is a lot to work with, but again, you don't do everything overnight. Right? So some of this is working into that. But I think that there's great opportunity here for us to, better use our time for greater return.
Yeah, I mean, this is maybe way too big to get into now, but I need some information to kind of put me in the real world here, because having been a teacher myself, I thought that one of the great aspects of the profession was the amount of autonomy I had to be creative in my own special way, I guess, to kind of work the crowd to see what was really needed, rather than you know, sort of having it all kind of prepared before. I mean, I was always well prepared, but you know what I mean? It's like, well, okay, these kids just aren't getting this, so maybe I should spend a little more time on this or explain it in a different way or whatever. And, you know, in some ways that may be one of the problems, certainly in elementary and secondary teaching. That may be one of the reasons why our test scores are low, because there's way too much autonomy and there's way too much inconsistency, etc. And yet, I think there's a lot of people that are drawn to teaching because it is a creative profession. And now I'm concerned about, geez, coordinators and then super coordinators and then package stuff all over the place. And if it works, I mean, it's great, and maybe even the teachers themselves will say, "Oh, geez, why haven't we been doing this for years?" But it seems to me that there's this cultural loop for the people who really are the moving forces in the classroom. I mean, you know what I'm talking about, right?
I do. I can even address that for you because I too am a teacher who loves creativity. And that was one of my concerns, Carrie. So when we went to the sites, we asked that very question of many of the teachers. And they said they did not feel that it squashed their creativity. And the way that I can understand that is by saying if someone gives you a packet of material, so your objectives and the materials you're going to use, and they give me the same packet, my guess is we're going to deliver those in different ways.
Okay.
But we have the same outcome that's expected. Now they do use, there is a standard format of like cooperative learning. They make sure they do celebrations. They make sure they do report outs. They make sure that students use what's called academic language. So there is some format to it, but I have to imagine that you and I would deliver those lessons very differently.
So one of the things I didn't see in the list of responsibilities was, you know, I think this coordinator not only should like make sure everything is Xeroxed and out there and you know, and all the data is collected, et cetera, but somebody has to be there to help teachers make this adjustment
Yes.
from doing what they've been doing for a long time, some of them, to doing, you know, I mean, I'm all in favor of being more consistent and being more goal oriented and making sure that the goals are clear, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, that was sort of my big bitch in the last meeting, sort of preparing the teachers to make the cultural adjustment, right? And I would say that these coordinators have got to be part of that, helping to
agree
make
with
the
you.
adjustment.
They do. We're starting actually April 10th. We're going to put professional development together for teachers, 3-hour sessions so that they can get an overview to try to let them see the picture of what's it going to look like, have them handle the materials, ask questions. And that's just 3 hours so that they can at least start to process what the changes are going to look like. There are some buildings that have already started that transformation by putting in some cooperative learning groups and things like that.
So I guess my thing is not just getting reading scores up. Be really happy about that, and math scores and social studies. God, it really needs a lot of work in this system. I'd be proud to have served, you know, in a body that helped make that happen. I'd like to have along with that fulfilled teachers. So if I think we have a dual thing.
Some of the feedback that has been collected, you know, from, you know, teachers who had first voiced concern because of how structured the system was. They then reported afterwards in research studies that they felt that they were a better teacher at the end.
Okay. That's really good.
Additionally, if you recall, there's a differential cost And a lot of that cost differential with SFA is training. It's very big on developing teachers, developing the leadership team, in engaging all of those in that constant review about how things are doing. Similar to the PLC model, with a lot more structure of, working through this, where all this information becomes important in terms of how they're monitoring their progress.
One of the things I sat down with a group, I think they were first grade teachers here, and their PLC group. And it's interesting because a lot of the elements that they're doing are similar to what's going to happen. What's interesting though is, I don't want to say interesting, but I guess if everyone were doing that across the board, I think we'd be looking at a different story.
No,
But these teachers are doing something different in their grade level for whatever reason, and they've been working together for a long time. But so again, I think it's going to be, and they're really a cohesive unit, and I think that's what is going to happen in these other areas. And my understanding of this position is also they're kind of the SFA expert for your school. They are your go-to person. And then there's also, on top of that, is part of the money we pay for is someone actually at SFA that is ours. Not that they're going to be in our district all the time, but for those people then to go to. So that's where the extra days of development are going to come in, that they're going to get that and become that expert for their school. So that
We have some very impressive people who have expressed a lot of interest in these roles.
Cool.
So I'm pretty excited about it because it's a pretty strong group so far.
I know, I'm just sad they're not going to be this.
And throughout the years,
True.
the teachers that I've talked with throughout the years, especially when we talked about autonomy, a lot of things that take that away from them is, 1 year they had to start adding this report, and then they had to start adding this, the teacher's effectiveness. They're starting to do all these different things except for concentrating on the teaching, and that's where a lot of that load on them takes away from their autonomy and being able to be creative. And I look at the primary responsibilities of this job, and you've got organize, support, assist, provide, organized, monitor, all these things. Hopefully taking some of that stuff off of the plate of the teachers will open up that and allow them to be a little bit more creative as well too. That's what I hope for.
All right, well, I know we always get talking about SFA and more so than with these coordinator positions. So I do need a motion in a second. I believe
We
we're
do.
already
We
a
do.
motion in a second, okay? So any further discussion about these positions? Okay, seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Okay, so we are to other business, and I just had written a couple of notes down here. Just a couple things, to just, those of you that are on Facebook or want to send out a little message to your schools, it's Public Schools Week. So there's lots of, celebration going on at different schools for that. So just, thank everybody in the community for that. There's also Read Across America going on. I've seen in our schools, so that's exciting. That are focusing on lots of reading this week. March 7th, we have a 4K open house, 4:30 to 6, and that is going to be, I believe, at all 3 sites. Is that right, Jamie?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. The open houses for 4K, is that at all 3 sites?
I can't answer that.
Okay. So, you can just look on our website because it's on there. Tomorrow, there's an SFA, I believe. Is that in the conference room or here?
It's here, in one.
In one, okay, conference room 1. So those of you that like to, listen, see the materials and stuff, that's at 6, I believe. And then, you saw there's a lot of, special meetings that Lori had posted. Those are regarding, all the referendum talks that Jim is gonna
Yeah,
do, so feel free to come out to those. You know, and support the referendum. And, oh, yeah, thank you. I knew I was gonna write that one. Youth Art Month.
Yeah.
And the
yeah.
kickoff is this
Sunday,
this Sunday. So we've been invited to that. So, if you have a chance to be at the RAR West, 1 o'clock, they're gonna have a reception for that. And I think that's it. Any other, activities or anything? Okay, yeah, sure.
Okay, in future meetings, I think if we stick with our normal schedule, we'll be meeting as a curriculum committee on the 16th. And our ad hoc student advisory behavioral committee will be meeting on the 9th and 23rd. We're gonna start meeting every of the second and fourth Tuesdays, like every month now. So that's right, guys.
A quick jump there, we have the public referendum presentation is here that same day, at 6:30, so just
Okay.
to FYI.
Good to know. And then so we'll have to plan a 5 o'clock and we're gonna get earlier. But we have to cover, so we'll see.
You mentioned those referendum meetings.
Yeah, what time did that meeting start then? That'd be 5 o'clock.
That's what I would think it would be. Would you guys be okay with that? I mean, that's
I
our
think as long
normal
as-
day, so whatever works for you guys.
As long as, yeah, we just gotta be done by 6:30, right? Or-
Before then, probably.
Like by 6.
Okay,
It's up to you. I mean, I have
6:15, I
a
believe.
flexible schedule, so what, and you two probably don't have that.
Yeah, I mean,
so maybe just let me know and we'll figure that out.
okay. Yeah, just
Look at your
want,
schedules and just,
Okay.
but if we stick with that, we should have a meeting. And I'll talk to Jamie too, and powers to be about agenda and that kind of stuff. I'll get with you too, okay?
And then, remember, we have a special meeting tomorrow for those of you that can be here. Who's gonna be able to be at that special meeting tomorrow?
I'll be.
So 1,
We got enough.
2, 3, 4.
We got enough more, we figured.
And I won't be here, but, Katie will.
So the 4 of us have to
Yeah,
make
the
sure.
one.
we're gonna-
You don't have that for finance and budget.
Yeah, we don't have one scheduled yet.
It's the 15th. I'm sorry, is there?
I had put, yeah, okay, I did put that in there. So, yeah, we have the 15th then, finance and budget, this month. That is, we will, we'll get that to you, and that's at, we're doing our normal time of 5:30, right?
Yes. We have, would we need to shift it?
No, we were just trying to see. All right, and I did, we kind of jumped ahead on that. But, so the last thing we wanted to talk about today, take the kind of the bulk of our meeting to talk about is, kind of our governance model. We've been talking about this at, the governance, executive meeting. And, you know, one of the things that, you know, we were all given the book here. And, I did put a letter, Jim and I put a letter together, about this that we, it got attached late, but we also have a copy there. But we're really kind of looking at, do we need a different, and I wanted to bring it up for all of us to talk about, is do we need a different structure to how we govern? So is the committee structure that we have now, is it effective? Or do we need to do something different? You know, we've asked our leaders to look at efficiency and effectiveness. And so one of the things I wanted to do is make sure that as a board, we feel like we're able to support, you know, especially these 2 big things that we have launched, which would be the raising our achievement scores and, you know, reining in discipline. So, you know, does our current committee structure support our strategic plan? And so I wanted to talk about that today. And one of the suggestions, if you turn the page over to number 2, the page 2, you just flip it over. This is just a suggestion from this book, talks about the different committee structure. And so I'll let Jim talk a little bit about this as well and kind of why this is coming to the forefront. You know, and why we're making the suggestion at this time.
So, again, let me encapsulate, the proposed committee structure in this book, which we read, and you may or may not have picked up this, because if you look at the diagram, it's just 4 committees. A governance committee, which is similar to the current board's executive committee. You know, really fills a similar role. How well is the board functioning? How is it doing? What direction does the board president and this committee of officers do, you know, to the other committees that support that work? Okay, so that's really important. The second one, committee, is operational, with the focus of student achievement is really why we're in schools. Okay, so it really says that should be your primary work, as well as strategically, where are you moving the district, and with that in mind, and operational, how does this all fit together? So a big committee is with that focus of what are we really trying to do to elevate student achievement. This other committee, then the second committee, really goes back to what Tony has suggested right along, is how are we monitoring our progress? You know, what are our key performance metrics? You know, how are we doing? And so that's another significant one. Then if you're a larger school district, it even says you have a separate committee for talking about how you're handling your internal and external stakeholders, how you manage it. But with a smaller one like us, they would fold that committee into one of these 2 existing committees. Okay, that's what they would do. You know, there could be some division. You know, for example, you could put the majority of that responsibility in operational, but you might have a legislative component that's in the other one. I mean, you know, so strategically you might look at that. So keep that in mind. That's the structure. Now, the author says, and you'll find this quite often in the circles of those who develop boards, like the School Board Association and others, whether or not it's not-profit or schools in terms of the public setting. But what they suggest is you should have a consultant. So one of the questions you should consider in going down this road is, do we have the expertise to do this ourselves? He would strongly recommend against this, about working to try to develop yourself, you know, versus having people who are trained and assisted in that. Now, you do have, you know, individuals like myself and Jamie with years of experience, but this still is a lot of work, you know, to figure out how to do this right, because what you don't want to do is have something less than what you have right now. You really are looking for a far greater return. You know, just like you've challenged me and directed me in terms of what is it that you wanted me to achieve. And essentially, you are doing much of what the work suggests you should be doing. It's just identifying a different structure to support that. But it says boards should no longer be passive participants. They should be very much involved with the administrative team, and that everything that comes to the full board really goes through the committee. And many of the things you are already working to put in practice. You know, my only concern though sometimes is how long we're spending. You know, I don't know that we're very efficient in what we're doing. You know, I think we're working to do the right stuff, but we also have to figure out how to make good use of everybody's time. You know, and I think that comes through our refinement. So those are some things. Now, one of the things that it also suggests is two approaches to developing the board: a retreat. And at the last board meeting, we said, let's not go to retreat. Well, you know, the transparency is important. And I would just tip my hat to that, because I think, you know, there obviously is nothing to hide, even though, you know, when you kind of let your hair down and you're working to problem solve and you're getting into this. But doing this in the public eye is good. You know, even though the other ones would be, you know, open to the public too. So I think that's good. The other suggestion is a task force. Take some of your board members, like the executive, the officers, and you do a lot of the work, you know, to figure out, okay, how do we roll these things out? What's the charge to these committees, you know, based on some of the information that's in there. So you're giving direction to the committees and those chairs in terms of what these committees are attempting to do. And a lot of it's the same work. It's just the way that it's structured, you know, that you're working through that and where your focus is at. So that's you know, that's a suggestion that I have, is that, you know, you could use your existing executive committee to plan, you know, in terms of how these two committees would work, but you could have that work played out in the committee of the whole at one of these meetings right here. and you start taking off a segment. Okay, how are we gonna take on the instructional, the operational? Maybe let's take half the meeting, you know, and again, you can shape this in different ways. We'll take half of the meeting and we'll discuss the operational issue of student achievement relative to this, implementing this school reform. You know, what more specifically are we doing? You know, how are we setting goals in this? How are we gonna track this? You know, that might be the second part. You know, that's how the other committee would say, these are how we're gonna monitor this. You know, so I shared that in terms of, those are some of my takeaways, you know, in terms of reading this book. If you look, again, you know, where's our focus? And if you know, essentially your work with student achievement at the center is in that circle. And this is what would be referenced as the instructional core. This is where learning takes place. And you can't probably see it, but there's 3 circles in there. One is the student, one is the teacher, and the third is curriculum. That's what is used in that instructional core for learning to take place. That's really the focus of your work is student achievement. Those are the 3 main components. And if you stop to think of some of your decision already this year has been supporting work in that area, right? You know, you launched a strategic plan because of that. You adopted a whole school reform improvement model because of that. You know, so in many ways, that's really good.
Can we back up a minute?
Yes.
Can we? Can we back up a minute? Yes.
You can go.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I don't ever recall the discussion happening that we shouldn't have a retreat. I mean,
Oh.
I don't,
It
you
was
know,
it was at the executive.
I don't want a task force either. I mean, this is sort of I think the whole board, I think we should go to the damn school forest, you know, for a weekend, you know, light a fire, you know, and like really,
Burn incense.
yeah, maybe burn incense or maybe even something else, but, that I didn't mean
We're okay with it.
seriously, but the thing is that it really seems to me that, God, this is so like sterile, it seems to me. And I wasn't in on any discussion. And I think that we really need to, as a board, like sort of make these decisions ourselves as a whole.
Right, which is why I bring it today, because I wanted us to talk about, you know, do we think the model we have now is going to be effective moving to reach our goals?
Yeah, I
Are
think we
being
should talk
effective?
about that. I haven't really thought if it's effective or not.
Right.
Because I haven't had anything to compare it to in terms of what could be better or what could be worse. Some days I think, oh God, it's committee stuff again. I mean, I felt that way my whole career. You know, it's like, oh geez, another committee meeting.
Right.
And it's a little like, you know, it's like cleaning the stables and that at times. And I'd be happy to like think about being much cooler about this business than just by committees.
Kathy?
Yeah, you know, I think this whole idea is like for anybody in all the changes that we've been making in our district, it's scary, right? Like for 3 years now, I've known like our way of being a board, and that's what's comfortable to me. But at the same time, several times during those years, we've talked about things that were like, well, what committee should this go to? You know, where we've got crossover from like personnel or curriculum or building and grounds and budget and finance, or, you know, that's come up many, many times. So every time that happens, we're all kind of like, what should we do with this? And it makes sense to me to make some changes, and if taking everyone else out of the comfort zone, maybe we ought to too. And I think we do an effective job of running. I think we together though. And I think by possibly doing something like this, that we could maybe reach another better level.
I mean, is there any constitutional reasons why we have to have what we have? I mean,
No,
is it set down and, you know,
It's just the way
granted
it's always
anyway?
been done.
just as always what it's been, and it's also, I would say, common practice. But I remember when Mike came on board and he goes, I'm supposed to create a personnel agenda and, I've never been on a personnel committee. So
Oh, okay.
Mike, with all his experience, has not worked in a district that had one. So
Oh,
there
that's
are,
interesting.
so there are different models. And I think the other thing is some of the things that we present, for example, and it didn't take that long, but, the curriculum committee just talked about these 3 travel things. And I'm thinking, how is that board governance?
Yeah, it's
Right?
administration, isn't it?
Right? And, we don't want to be, it gets us into that minutia. And I think if we, again, go back to, as we expand, and have this shared leadership approach, if our district leaders believe those travel is going to enhance the experience of, they make that recommendation. And again, we'd have to make sure that, I'm sure it's in a policy somewhere that
Yeah, I
says fair
couldn't agree
traveling,
more. I
right?
do feel like most of the stuff we do on committees is administrative stuff, and it's just like, oh, God,
Correct. So
how
we-
am I qualified to decide, what kind of pipe to put in? Maybe fit sets that I'm not, and, and it's sort of like, okay, well, I think we're asking we're about to ask the basic question, it's like, what the hell is the board supposed to be? You know?
Right.
What the
Right,
hell
and-
is the board supposed to be? And-
Right, and if you, I've read this book a couple times now, it really talks about, we're here to govern. We're here, and we're here to
Well, we're here to
govern,
represent.
be
too, so, yeah,
strategic.
yeah.
Is systematic in what we're doing and, kind of connect all these pieces together. And it just doesn't seem like our structure in, the book calls it silos, that we have all these different little silos instead of, we're never really looking at the big picture, which is all our schools and how everything works together.
Yeah, I think the best committee we've had working in some times is a rebel committee that, is an ad hoc committee. I mean, I think that there was a tremendous amount accomplished there that we could never have accomplished in any of our committees, in any of our standing committees. So I think that there is a need for more expansive thinking. Sorry.
Tony,
So if we went down this path with these 3 committees, what would happen to the committees that are in place now? Those all go away?
I would suggest that they would. What you're really doing is starting to fold the work, for the board as a whole. You would put some, the executive committee of the 3 officers, the 2 of them taking chairs for those 2 new committees, but not to really implement that to next year, but to kind of test what that looks like within the committee of the whole. That you would all be trying to work your arms around it, even though you started seeing some division. So the executive committee would be responsible for really planning this out. What are we going to do at the next session? Let's just take this one, or let's split it into the first part, we'll do this, the second part, we'll do this. Focus will be instruction, in terms of maybe SFA, in terms of how that's will evolve, maybe some other aspect. At some point in time, it's going to be, how we're going to carry this out is we've got to staff it and we need a budget. What does the strategic plan look like now? What does the operational plan look like in terms of what resources does it require? We're talking about that right now in isolation, right? We're kind of saying, oh, now let's put on our financial hat, when we're looking at that. This starts thinking more naturally how these things fit together.
So Jim, are there examples for us? Is this being used in places that we know of that we can, as members, maybe watch some meetings to see this in action? I'm such a visual person. I'd like to actually see it.
I haven't seen it myself.
Okay.
I only know that Oregon schools are using it. This author has been around. I've read probably 4 or 5 of his previous books. This is a new evolution about saying boards need to change. Boards no longer want to be passive participants. They want to be much more engaged. So this is an evolving field right now.
Well, and I know there are a lot of boards that they use the same terminology we use with building and grounds, personnel, curriculum, but lump them together. So like you would have a committee of curriculum, personnel, and
The structure is
whatever, you know
really
what I
the
mean?
same more in the business world than you would.
yeah, but it's just, I think it's like, this is just going by another name. But I know that those are out there. There's just different terminology. So I don't know, it's just kind of interesting to see it actually.
Sorry, Kenny.
That's okay.
So I'm kind of cautious, in the structure. Because, you know, each committee is very vague in its title. And that might be by design, it might be, you know, it might have the vagueness in order to, well, just let me finish, sorry. But, the vagueness might be there, you know, so that it can incorporate, you know, multiple things that maybe not brought together in a personnel or buildings and grounds, very specific, duty. And that's kind of where we had the, you know, some of the overlap, right? You know, it was kind of, you know, you noticed that, okay, well, should finance, you know, we had a lot of those joint committee meetings, be involved, and I guess maybe that's some of the reasoning, but then when it gets vague like that, it's the reason for the caution is trying to find the appropriate committee to take up specific tasks and duties. So I'm cautious there as to how that would look. Just in, like, take for example, you know, with the recommended strategic and operational planning. Okay, well, would that be something that we're looking at the buildings and how that they look, or would that be falling under performing monitoring and auditing? Is that, you know, is the building needing some upgrades? Is it performing at its efficiency that it needs to be? So that's where some of the question that I would have as to that.
So each one of those has a description
Mhm.
of exactly
Oh,
what is targeting, what do I want to say? Not the charge,
What it includes, right?
right,
Purview.
the purpose. The
Yeah.
purpose of what the committee is supposed to do. And I would, you know, the other thing I think is that, we don't have a real clear, like, how do agendas get set, right? We know how they've been set all along, but, you know, I look at what the city of Manitowoc does, right? I mean, everything is linked to a document.
Yeah.
This document comes in and they say, you know, document 4568, you know, and this sounds like, remember, they sit at the table and you've been there and they
Yeah.
hand them out. This should go to this one, and this should go to this, and this should go to this, right? So we don't even have a real good mechanism of how to get something on an agenda, right? So I mean, and then there's the question of what are the things that should be on a board agenda versus something that our administrators handle.
Right.
And our leadership handles.
Yeah.
So, but to answer your other question, it's, you know, it details in here exactly what happens, budget and planning. And I think when we're talking about, like the strategic and operational planning, that's where we're looking at overall, what are we doing with our operations? We have the strategic plan now, and we're talking about all operations, not just buildings. We're talking about programming. How does it all fit together? And I think when we have curriculum over here and finance over here, and they're so married to each other that we're not real effective by having one group decide this and then kick it over to here and then have them. I mean, I just think that we're missing sort of this bigger picture of how everything works together.
And I would,
I just wanted to ask Mike, actually, because you said you hadn't been part of that personnel committee before. So what kinds of, like, boards, how were some of their makeup and stuff? Like, what have you seen?
Every place I've been has been a little bit different.
Okay.
So I'm just talking about Beaver Dam. They had one board meeting a month, they had 9 board members. One meeting was operations, which a lot of times was business and personnel, that type stuff. The other one was all instruction, teaching and learning, all that kind of stuff. That was their format for the most part. Oshkosh was a little different. They had 2 board meetings a month, 7 board members. The first one was all workshops. And if you went into a workshop, it was something like this, where you would address the board, you'd give them X, Y, and Z, and then you say, okay, I'm gonna bring this back in 2 weeks to the next board meeting. And then that would be the business meeting. So as you can see, you know,
Really different.
yeah, very different. So,
Angela, did you wanna say something?
There are a lot of times too where the work I do links with many different committees, and so that, you know, every year you do a joint personnel and finance committee for contracts. You know, I looked at the board agenda tonight. I'm like, gosh, I wonder if there are any costs I need to be aware of in those, in those proposals. I hadn't seen them before, you know, and so like if there'd be something in there at times, sometimes looked at, sometimes not, you know, and it just, you know, it streamlines things a little bit more and makes sure that everyone is at the table.
Wow.
Tony?
I'd just like to add, at least from my perspective, I kind of like the idea of having fewer committees if we can be more efficient. And, you know, maybe on that same note, maybe there is an opportunity to, you know, while we're in these committees, to focus on higher value items, you know, at some point, like, you know, and I don't know what the answer is. I'm just, you know, thinking out loud here, but, you know, when we're presented with things to approve that's already in the budget, that's already approved, it's like, why are we, you know, okay, you know, it's already in the budget, it's approved, great, you know, and I just think some of that stuff is, you know, I guess it's good to hear about what's going on, but, you know, are there higher value items while we're here and spending time on things that we should be tackling, or could be tackling?
Yeah, and is there a better, I mean, because I think the other thing is there a better way to be informed about those things? Because you're right, it's not that they're not important, that we shouldn't know about them.
Right.
But is it a matter of taking the time up of a meeting to do that versus, you know, Angela shooting out a memo to everybody and saying, hey, just so you know, be excited, you know, we're sending people off to do this, you know, or whatever.
here's the risk.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm just wondering, so where is the accountability piece of this, though?
The accountability would be in the audit function, that second committee, that third committee.
Yeah, the audit,
That's,
performance monitoring
Right.
committee.
yeah, you know, and I want to go back to one of your first concerns, the fear.
Yeah.
And if you stop to think about, have we just experienced something with fear within our own school district? Yes, we've talked about some
Oh, that's what I was
change.
referring to. Like, we shouldn't be immune
So
to that
I
either.
wanted to, you know, I got my cliff notes from taking, you know, pulling out stuff from this book, and I just read you some. Never underestimate how powerful fear of change can be, even among typically high achieving, tenacious, and disciplined people who populate boards. Many quite smart, ambitious people prefer the known, however unexciting and even unproductive it might be. The unknown with its new challenges that they might not be up to handling. More often than not, the fears of a failure, of being challenged and finding one's humiliated by failure. Then it says, coming up with conscious rationalization to justify their opposition, you know, the change. You know, I'm thinking about as we killing change with 1,000 sensible questions, which hides fear of change under the guise of tenacious devil's advocacy expressed in endless what-if questions. Did we experience some questioning?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, you know, that's.
Well, I
fear.
walked in here today and I just said, yeah, I don't know that we're ready for this.
I don't know. I mean, I was gonna say, passivity was like the key word that describes, I've been on a ton of boards. I can tell you, I've been on a lot of boards. And mostly the function of the board is, you know, about half the people on the boards, well, they kind of like the honorary sort of cachet that comes with being a board member, but they don't want to do a lot of work for the most part. And so I think the function of the board normally has been to kind of be the popular sovereignty piece in the puzzle, that being elected by the people or being appointed by the city council, you know, that all power comes from the people. That that most boards I've been on have basically existed to legitimize and validate what the chief administrator, who really knows what the hell is going on, wants to do. And I kind of like the idea of a less passive role. And I think that, you know, some of the things that I see that really need to be done. I think the board, for example, could be a real bridge, certainly between the public and the administration. You know, I think it could be. I mean, we're all elected. We all have, you know, we all had voters, and you know, we some of us have, you know, real different take on some things, and that's okay. I think that's good for the juices. But I do think that, you know, there's sort of a need, I think, in education especially, for there to be a bridge between the quote unquote employees and the administration. I mean, since the administration, you know, really doesn't have to run for office, that I think the idea, there's a real seed, I think, in your idea of saying, okay, well, you take Monroe School, or you take Wilson, and to actually, you know, talk to the principals or the teachers. I mean, I've been in Madison. I've got former students that are teachers there. So I hear some good information. So that bridging stuff is a good idea. But I think we really should think about this seriously. I mean, we could be, since we're changing heaven and earth in the matter of our public schools as it is, why not adventure ourselves out there and say, we're going to create a revolutionary kind of school board.
And there's, you know, another piece to this is, now because our board is smaller, they have you typically this external / stakeholder relations committee is responsible for maintaining effective communication, working relationships with the community.
I think that's cool.
So that's a committee that would get sucked into these other ones, because we don't have enough people to have another committee. But I think the other thing about that too is, you know, in our strategic plan, I believe it's the last pillar that talks about, I mean, we know that our relationships are broken in many different areas, and that's part of what we have in that, in our strategic plan to make that better. Yet we don't really, we don't spend time as a board talking about that, or an initiative, or, you know, whatever that is. And so again, I think that there are maybe some things that, one other thing I was going to say too, and I'm kind of going all around here, but another one is, you know, we've talked about, not only do we talk about our own community, but our political partners, you know, people that are making decisions about financial matters, you know, in Madison, that, you know, as a governing body, that we need to be part of leveraging that kind of stuff.
Find time to get to it, or you consumed by.
Right. You know, but that's, again, part of that is overseeing the development and implementation of legislative governmental relations policies and strategies. You know, so I think this just, you know, and I've never seen this before, you know, but it seems to make sense with, like when I got on the board, like the first month, I was like sort of shell shocked, like, I don't know what is even going on here.
Yeah, I know the feeling. Yeah.
It's something I've never been a part of before, like a board. I just, right. And then, you know, really looking at, you know, again, what are we charged with? What are we supposed to be doing as individual members, and how can we both be effective? And this just seems to fit. I mean, it talks about the whole history of being passive. And that's why, Carrie, I said I knew you'd love this book, because it talks about how board members were tired of being passive and just having all the administrative people do the work, and they hand them this big packet and they just vote on it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And that this this allows you to, you always say it, because I can never remember the language that they use, but, where you really feel like you're taking a stake in this overall organization, because of the way that your committees are now structured, is what this book says. That can happen.
Yeah, the committees are structured to maintain the status quo. So
You know, this, if I might, this takes you back. Remember when I first was hired, you know, two things just stuck out. And you were so firm on this, and then you were seeking somebody who understood what you were saying. You know, I picked that up and was in that circle, was an achievement. And that was the student, the teacher primarily, and the curriculum. And then what you see around there is what you also felt was missing was the strategic plan. And so what you just, whoops, how about you go there? And so,
that was a digression. Now we're back to the, yeah, that was all a digression, but you know, I think
A quick question before we, before you continue on there. So I want to make it clear. So these would be the committees. We still would be having committee of the whole where public input's provided and we're getting
We're all
together.
still having
Those are
regular board
Those are
meetings.
still taking
Yeah.
place,
Yeah.
just making sure that everybody's.
Yeah.
And then,
That's where your official business takes place.
right, and so then it's, it's offering up the member to provide their input for a committee that they don't sit on. But I did also want to add one other thing. I always really enjoy the fact and utilization of subcommittees. In our district, we do have a lot of people that are really taking an interest into what's going on with the district. And it does provide an opportunity for those people. We saw the value that was done with the ad hoc committee. So I guess I would encourage that if we are going to look at that we don't ignore the use of subcommittees.
I feel very strongly about, how do you again dig down deep, So again, what you have here is you have that instructional core in the middle, but you just identified the importance of the strategic plan. And you can see, here are the 5 pillars that the strategic just plan. You had student success, student culture, the external, the resources. I mean, these are all important, okay, that are needed. We've identified some priorities here strategically, but what's missing now is this outer circle. And this outer circle is how you're going to govern this work. How are you going to bring this about? And that's what this book starts talking about. Now, what's interesting here too is I remember Kathy saying that you've heard me say a lot of systems and structures. And Kathy, it's like, what are systems and structures? It is this. We were the yellow. And systems and structures spring down below are getting all the arrows pointing in the right direction. That we're all moving together because of consistency. The lack of systems has this autonomy where every school seems to be doing something a little different. Where we haven't come together.
I'm sorry, quick question here. So that 4th committee that's referenced, would we just not have that, or that?
No, that would be rolled in
Okay.
to one of the, either the operational one, which is committee 2, or the audit one, that would, or maybe some division, for example. I could see most of it being in the operational, with maybe the legislative being in the other. We identified the importance of really having a platform going to go to our legislators in terms of, we talked about the inequitable funding system. What are we going to do about it?
I think that's a great idea. I mean, we just,
Tony, in here it says that, I'll find it, keep talking. Oh, since many school boards are relatively small, only 5 to 7 members, which is us, a structure of 3 committees plus the governance board operations committee will be obviously not work well. For a board of 7 members, a solution that has worked well in practice is to fold the community/stakeholder relations committee into either the planning or performance monitoring committee, resulting in a structure of 2 bread and butter standing committees plus the governance or board operations committee. So
Let me ask you another question. Who's responsible for developing new board members?
Oh, you
It's
mean
supposed to be the board
initiating?
president, but I don't think it should be. It should be everybody.
It's the board. Quite often, it's the default is the administration.
right, and that's what it has been.
Oh,
And
it doesn't
really,
mean that.
but how,
I mean, none of us ever got an orientation.
but,
Well, these guys
got
did.
one.
These
Did you
guys
get
did.
one?
but see, even
Yeah, they got a
that,
tote bag and a
was-
lanyard
All right, now we
and
got
lunch.
was that orientation by the board to the board members?
No.
Did you identify what governance meant? You know, see, this is what you're getting your arms around. It's no longer an administrative thing now. You're seeing a bigger purpose here in a bigger world.
And that's what the governance, board operations committee, that's what they do. They focus on the development of the board, they focus on the mentoring, they focus on the, orientation, at the evaluation of the superintendent.
Question, or, in going off of that, so we have a committee that, you know, we were thinking about rolling into one of these other committees. You know, we do have, you know, 4 other individuals that aren't on a second committee, according to this setup. Would that be, I mean, it would be an odd number, but would it be possible, would it be, what about even just having the, external stakeholder relations be composed of those 4 other individuals? And that would be providing some of that outreach.
Then we have another committee.
I understand that, yeah. I know, and I'm just trying to,
And
but there was a statement of need, right?
Yeah.
In this,
Edie says that you should, his recommendation is that people are just on one committee. That's number one.
oh, okay.
The
Yeah,
second
all right.
thing, is typically the governance or board operations committee also has the chairs of the other committees. So already you're getting people that are, you know, for instance, I mean, and again, you know, we just threw names in here. This is not
Yeah.
what it has to be, but you know,
Okay.
if Kathy were chair of strategic and operational planning, she's also on the governance committee, you know, because she's a
Well, the-
executive board member.
Part of
Which is
the
similar
reason
to
in
what you have
recommending
right
that is it also allows, especially when you're doing public relations and stakeholder relations, you're building those relations, so you're gonna have you're gonna be growing those individuals in their depth of knowledge of what's going on as well.
Right.
So,
And-
and as you
and-
get as you get more experience, that sharing is
And you may
another.
not have a formal meeting, right? I mean, you may not have a formal committee meeting, but there might be things that you're going to, like, you know, Matthew's gonna go to the Capitol event, right? And, you know, there's other ways, we'd be going to schools and, you know, I think there are other things that we're gonna be doing outside of a committee meeting that would be sort of a directive, but hang on one second, I'm gonna get Matt.
Procedurally, is there any differences between committees we have now and then the creation of these different ones? Procedurally,
Tell me more,
I'm asking, I don't mean tell me more,
procedure, you know.
like, is there a way of operation of how business is conducted in the committee?
So,
Is it all the same as Robert's rules, or trying to follow Robert's rules as much as possible? So,
Unless we decide.
Oh,
unless
like
we
policy
decide-
updates, is that what you're
unless we
saying?
decide
no, I'm
differently.
saying how this format is ran in the eye of the writer, yeah.
You know,
So-
Procedures.
So fundamentally, I'm hearing just a difference in organizing the ideas of how we tackle problems or solutions. And the biggest concern that we all see alarmingly is that, you know, the finance department needs to be intricately involved in all the decisions. And we're kind of not getting that right now with the siloing. So I completely understand that. And then you said one big fundamental about the writer is that they believe that one person should only be on one committee. What's the structure behind that? Just just to focus on that.
But that there's will also be a rotation, you know, that, because it
Correct.
wants the whole board to know the whole board functions.
Correct. So you wouldn't stay on a committee like the whole time that you're on. And I don't know that he talks about how often they'll switch, but they want every board member to know all the different functions. And so you would sit on the different, there'd be a rotation and you would move to that different committee. So again, that's that development piece that you would be part of, and you would know, you know, what the, strategic and operational planning stuff does, and performing, monitoring, auditing does. And, yeah, I forgot about that.
And that would be done at the organizational meeting
Correct.
after the April election.
Right.
Matthew.
Where would the committees we have now disappear if we were to go with this? Where would they fall in these committees?
Yeah, I tried to wrap my head around that. And that was what was hard, because I first took like everybody, their committee and what they were in, and tried to fit. I think one of the things, you know, that makes it difficult is I think a lot of the things that we're doing, I don't know that we need to be doing. I don't know that they fit. But because we've always done them. I mean, sometimes I'll call Mike and, or Mike will call and he's like, okay, we're gonna put our personnel committee agenda together. What are we gonna have on there?
Yeah. Right.
And Mike's great. He comes up with really great things that actually need to be discussed. But again, do we want to be coming up with an agenda for a meeting just to have a meeting?
No.
I mean, it doesn't.
Some of that,
Yeah, it just doesn't
No.
make any sense. And so it's again, what is it that a board needs?
Right.
What information do we need to be able to make our decisions and to be effective and to carry out the mission, right? Which is, let's get everybody to the best learning that they can be, and have, you know, safe schools that are people that are, you know, getting along, and, you know, all that other stuff, you know, so I think that, I just think we have an opportunity to do something different, and I think we could be more effective if we do it that way.
And a little bit along those same lines. I'm sorry, Matthew.
No, that's okay.
Okay.
Oh, I just was gonna agree that I do think that there's a better path forward, like what Kathy said earlier about, you know, we're not know where to send these things sometimes. That would be, I would imagine that would solve that issue. I'd also like to reiterate with what Carrie said as well too, and Colin touched on a little bit about subcommittees. The work Kathy's already done on the ad hoc committee is so important. I couldn't imagine anybody even fathoming how much effort she's put into that. So that needs to stay as well too. And then also, I agree with Carrie. I think we need to go to school force. But that's it.
We need to throw the scope for it.
That's my best idea.
But, you know, along the lines
Last 2 years. That's what we did.
that Stacy was suggesting, that we need to get to a higher ground of operation. You know, in terms of, are we really taking on the big issues? Some of the committee work, you know, this goes on, think of the board standing committees as a kind of an engine. With the most obvious and visible benefit is the indispensable preparation of board business meetings. So when you're ready to go to the board for, you know, it suggests much of their preparation involves separating the wheat from the chaff, so that board meetings can hone in on the critical, you know, elements. You know, so it's really about what are the big things, you know, and it suggests the silos get you really way into the weeds.
Yeah, the more I'm hearing you talk, the more I agree with everything you're saying. And I think there's probably a real, none of us should really be surprised, right? I mean, it's governors, right? So my expectations are pretty low, but you know, at the end of the day, you know, if we could just really be focusing on the highest value things that really need our attention, we could probably get a lot more done quicker.
There's a couple other things that, you know, on here was just a one-sheeter of strategies. You know, when you look at this material, it might help you, because I think you'll relate to this. And this one was an excerpt from the author before he wrote the book, in terms of some of the barriers stopping these things from happening. I'm certain.
Devil's advocate. So how do you get, so there's a outside problem, public input, somebody brings an address idea up, and then it needs to be, somebody thinks that it's concerned enough to bring to the board. They say it to the board at public input. what channel do we filter and bring in information so that we can address things publicly? Did you guys understand my question?
No, not really.
Okay, so,
That's all right.
yeah, that's why.
Well, I think I might, I mean, I was talking, with somebody about this today, and they're like, well, what do you do when somebody has a complaint? Right? I mean, and again, number one, we have a complaint policy.
We have a
number
system
one,
of
yeah.
that, I understand.
And then another thing is, we have a hierarchy, right? I mean, one of the things that, I think we've all learned, and I think sometimes it's been, difficult, but when somebody comes to us and, we need to say, have you talked to the principal? And if you weren't effective, if the principal wasn't helpful, or you didn't think they were helpful, who's the next person to go to? So I think there are those things. But again, you're right. If there is something that comes in, but again, the stuff that comes in on public input doesn't get funneled to a committee.
No, I'm trying to give an example of how information would come into the system besides through a strategic plan. So say there's an external problem, COVID happens, okay, or
yeah.
whatever we want to talk about.
Yeah.
I don't want to define that right now, but I want to say, how do we address unforeseen issues as a board through a channel?
Mhm.
Do we just, because does the chairman or chairwoman just bring it into a committee meeting then? Or to that committee meeting of operation planning, or I mean, maybe answer that, Jim, if you have.
Well, again, I think it would be similar to what you have now, right? But thinking, on a number of things. One, remember the one committee that says it's too big for this small of a board. It needs to be rolled in, but it's that stakeholder one. It means that not only are you waiting for it to come in, you're going out there to have an ear to the ground, so to speak, in terms of you're making connections with our external stakeholders. You are a part of the governance team with the administration assistants. We're working to really understand our impact of our schools on our, so obviously you would want to have feedback. You'd want to know, and where does that fit in terms of what you'd like to accomplish?
Yeah, I just want to make an observation that, I really grew up in a very different kind of political, polity, and in a parliamentary system. And normally the process of a parliamentary system is that parties go to the people with a set of proposals that they really, here in America, I mean, anybody who runs for office doesn't have to be in on any bigger plan. They can just make up what they want to talk about, and and if some people, you just talk about anything you want, just as long as you get elected. But in a parliamentary system, parties go to the people with a set of proposals. They want to do this, they want to do that, and in the next term, these are going to be the high priorities of things that are going to be taken on. Now I mention that because I think that the last election for school board came pretty close to that. There is certainly 3 of you and 2 others less directly involved, but talked about a set of things that needed to be addressed, right? So, and it seems to me that we've been sort of doing that. But what I'm saying is that
You admitted to it.
well, no, I mean, yeah, it's pretty obvious. I mean, everybody.
Things are getting done. I'm
Well, I mean,
I'm not trying to sell.
I know,
Okay, so
and
we're
I
for
wasn't
the
in on
wigs.
that one,
We have
so I
for the
don't
wigs.
know all the time. So, but the fact is that I think we should govern with intentions. And I think we should, if we don't do that, because we all run for election in separate terms, we should get together, absolutely, right after every election, and talk about okay, in the next year, these are the high priority things that we need to, and then we should tell the public that that's what we're going for. That's what we're going for.
Yeah.
And then we should, I don't think we necessarily need to have standing committees fixed forever. Then we should develop committees that respond to the need to carry that stuff out. You know, like we didn't have a committee until, until Dave and Kathy created the ad hoc committee. I mean, everybody knew that student behavior was a major issue in this thing. We didn't have a committee that even, had any tentacles at all involved in that. So one mutated, not as a result of the board, but as a result of, people that saw the need. And I think that we haven't had any committee that's dealt with, okay, how are we going to get academic achievement up? I mean, I don't think we haven't had one of those. We haven't had a committee that talks about like, holy Jesus, the buildings are falling apart. Maybe we should have a long-term sort of look at it. So, and adapt the committees to be utilitarian in carrying out a program. That would be my sort of, that would be the reflection of my background, and I think there's some merit in that. Oh, that's why I'm saying it, of course. Yeah. But I think that it's out of the box, outside the box on what would we do.
Right. And I think that, I feel like our strategic plan developed that. And, that's another thing in that, we say in the beginning of this letter here is that, you don't want it to be a dust collector. Now we have what those 5 goals are, and everything that we do now should be geared
I
toward
couldn't
that.
agree more.
And talk about, that was a place where we got feedback from the stakeholders,
Right.
To do that. So, yeah. Hang on one second. I think someone, no, I think it was Jim.
To answer, I think the hard part about that is the utility is great, but then the sunsetting of that committee is a challenge. And I think
You're right about
that's
that.
where like
That's true.
government are just going to continue to get bigger. So
bigger.
that would be my answer to that, which is still a great idea, but it's just there's no good exit to it. So I think Jim, you answered my question about what I asked, and it's through the external and the stakeholder relations. Like, so that's how you address those conflicts or those issues or those things.
You have to be aware.
And so you did answer my question. It just, we don't get a pretty committee for it because it's entwined into one or the other of those. So you did answer my question correctly. So thank you for explaining.
One of the things that I'd like to highlight though is thinking about what Carrie was saying in terms of what does that mean? Are you waiting for the public to have an outrageous charge to the board because something isn't getting done? Or do you take ownership for developing the board, your priorities, so a student achievement takes place? One of the problems that's in that I gave you that excerpt that he wrote before he published this book. One of the things that stops boards like this from getting into high governance is elections. Because other nonprofits develop, they go out and say, what do we want a new board member to have to make sure we deliver what we're aiming to deliver. And so this is why it's important for you to understand what governance is, what you're attempting to accomplish, what your main work is. And then every year you're going back, what's your priorities going in? Where are you at with this assessment? So it's a very disciplined process, but it suggests you need to also consider working to develop this and letting the public know what a good board member looks like. And that's why it suggests even board members speaking at Rotary, doing some other things by being engaged, with the community, just like administration, you expect the superintendent to. So there's an awful lot in this book, that really suggests you got to get to a higher ground here. And it really suggests that the silos keep you into the weeds.
Or maybe you didn't have anything.
I lost my train of thought.
Okay. Well, so
I
I
don't
mean,
know, I think this is pretty fruitful territory. I think, I'd like to go read the book and have some thoughts about it, and I think that maybe that's.
yeah, I mean, that's what I'm kind of like, where do we go next, right?
Yeah.
Tony?
I was just gonna add, just to your point, when you guys were trying to come up with an agenda item for personnel that maybe didn't need it, you know, or there may not have needed to be a meeting at that time, right? The thing that appeals to me about this structure is that it at least from my initial reaction, digesting this information and really just trying to wrap my head around it, it appears to be more conducive to, you know, just tackling issues as they come up. Then we just kind of say, all right, what are the big issues that we're dealing with, and then where would that go? Let's tackle that. We'll just have a meeting happen. So,
But it's also, but they're
But we
also,
need
but it's also
long-term-
very,
long-term.
it's also very planful. Because you are, again, you're looking at strategy and you're looking at how you're doing. Like, remember Brett said that you wanna talk about, one of those elements of your strategic plan at every one of your meetings, right? Because so we wanna, like, when we look at accountability and we say, how are we doing in this area, right? What has our district done? You know, we've charged you with, we want, you know, X, Y, or Z. What can you show us to do this? So I think they're bigger picture things that we're looking at rather than these small details. Again, it goes back to kind of your dashboard, right? But we're constantly looking at different dashboards that are measuring, you know, the kinds of things that overall are going to promote our district as a whole, if that makes sense.
no, that does make sense. And I see the benefit of both, right? Because you can focus on the things that are important as they come up, but then you always have that, you know, your head comes up over the trees, right? We're not like in the weeds with machete, like,
Right.
you know, getting into the minutia, but we're always kind of reminded of what's our big target, right? And sometimes it's easy to lose picture of that when you're in the weeds.
Correct.
So I like that.
So then the language clearly speaking, so I think we're talking about a proactive approach of governance instead of a reactive to you like to call whack-a-mole approach. So that's where we're trying to take on the issues before they happen through strategically having a roadmap and then following it, and however still being able to monitor and audit what's going on at the same point. So that I think that's the foundation of what this is trying to go after. Having a proactive solution instead of a reactive solution.
And I love how it ties in.
Or even
Just the rest of
passive,
the plan,
sure.
right? So that's gonna keep the plan in the forefront. It's gonna, to me, that's great.
That's true.
Here's-
One of the things to as a takeaway that's really important to understand really what that high level means. It suggests when something comes out of committee, it's the board chair who's reporting, not the administration. The board chair now understands the nuts and bolts of what we just discussed in committee. And you're advancing that agenda item now. That doesn't mean you can't use administrative support. But it's no longer, oh, you did some good work there. Okay, let's advance and explain it to the board.
Right. That's where the ownership comes.
Would
for
somebody
each one of us.
willingly speak out to say how it's been going or how it was presented before so that the public would know how things? Do you understand what I'm asking now?
More of the
I'm saying how we would be on a committee, and so I'm young to this, but you're on a committee and then you have an agenda and then there's a presentation and it's kind of like the way it's presented that you're not in ownership of the information. You're kind of just present. I can speak for myself. You're told a couple things and then you said, okay, we should do this without actually saying it. There's not really a roadmap laid out of why we did it. Just say, do this or vote this way because we want you to, instead of, going through it and understanding it, so like that's, and I think the public doesn't get to see that side of it. They think that there's more meetings that we go to or more information or more decision or conversation. And I think that's travesty to people that they don't get to, that we don't get to see how things are actually being presented to us, that some things we don't see until Stacy would say this a year ago or two. It's like, I was given this on Friday, and it's not Lori's fault by no means. Just sometimes the information doesn't get packaged till very late, and then you're supposed to absorb it, read it. So I found when my first few months of doing this, I'd be reading stuff for hours that weekend just so I would be prepared for the meeting on Tuesday. So, that's what I signed up for.
And still feel like you don't know what's going on.
And still, so what I'm saying is,
Yeah, right.
so what Jim is trying to articulate right now is saying that, through the chair of the committee is intricately involved with the actual director of the central office position, and they're working together to understand a roadmap. And then you're saying the actual chair, the board chair, is going to be presenting to the public and to the rest of the board to have their skin in the game, is what is another term to call it. That's more of the approach of ownership and accountability. So that's, I wanted somebody else to explain it that had years of experience, but that's fine.
So what we're saying then is we wouldn't necessarily have consent agenda because we would.
Or you could have consent agenda on some
You
things.
still would, because you're
There
gonna
could
still
be
have
some things that are
minutes from
required by law
meetings.
or whatever,
Yeah.
minutes, I mean, so there could be some things that you have to act on. You know, for example, I'm not sure that we have to, you can make it just a board responsibility to approve out-of-state travel. Or you could say if it's in the budget, the superintendent can advance it on a consent agenda with the opportunity for anybody to pull something off.
Yeah.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? So you create some more, so, again, we would define those, how far we want to go with that, and it's, again, I'm one that believes very strongly, if you have a plan and you're working the plan, why do you keep visiting the plan unless something was wrong? That you obviously stuck out and caught. I mean, why are we reapproving something that we agreed, this is a
Right,
legitimate
we already
expense and
agreed
we
on the
put in the
budget,
budget?
and it was in the
Right.
budget.
So you have a
And now
plan
we're
and all of a
going
sudden
back
you're
and
revisiting
now
this.
we're going back
Second,
and
we
micromanaging
do that a
our
lot.
team, right? And saying, okay, yeah, now you can.
But because we've always done it,
But I guess I was referring more to, maybe I misconstrued what was being said, but what Luke was saying, in the previous boards, before we did consent agenda, as a chairperson, you presented to the board. Basically, the public would know then too, what happened in committee to give kind of thought and meaning behind it before we approved. So we're not saying we go back to that. We would still continue with consent agenda. That was my question. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we would. I think what Jim's saying is you take ownership in that you're the one. So sometimes when I go, okay, who's presenting, SMA coordinator positions, Jamie? Right, that you would have the knowledge background from your committee or whatever that was to be able to present it. And then your whole committee would really know the nuts and bolts of that to be able to present it rather than just it being on your leaders. There's more collaboration that happens than it's like I think we went one model was that we have our administrative team, they do everything. They set everything, right? And then we flip it and we're like, no, all our board chairs, they're gonna set everything, right? And this kind of gets rid of either one of those and comes back to making it very collaborative because we all need each other, right, on that to make those decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's different kinds of work here. I mean, we're talking about it, as if everything is sort of a homogeneous sort of thing that we can deal with. I mean, there's housekeeping work.
Right.
And we do a lot of that in our committees now.
Correct.
It's sort of well, Chris calls and says, well, we're gonna have a meeting on Tuesday and we get together and I have no clue what the hell's going on. I don't, and so all of a sudden we get a presentation and it's like, we talk about it for a while. And we do housekeeping work, like schoolyard at Jefferson, etc. And I don't know if we need to spend as much time on that sort of stuff as we do now.
Agreed.
And then there's the
Yeah.
there's the other thing. The other kind of work is policy work, policy development, policy which reflects values and reflects, expectations on behaviors, etc. I think that's really important that the board do that.
Right.
And then there's the other level of work is planning work, like what do we want to do to make this school system better than it is now? And that's big stuff. And it takes, you know, it takes a lot of, and I think that, God, I think in lots of ways, the housekeeping work is, I don't know shit about that for the most part, you know? I mean, I would, you know, throw the budget at me and I'm, you know, I can look at it all weekend and still not know. So, but the thing is that I think as elected citizens, we can do policy pretty well. I think we can really do that. I mean, I think, you know, if we can get our values aligned and get agreement, et cetera, and, you know, about expectations and behavior and how we handle the big business of this body, this school system.
Well, and I think, you know.
And then planning, I think, you know.
But along with planning, you know, I'm thinking about Jamie's curriculum mapping, right? I mean, it should be a no-brainer on when we're going to look at handbooks and when we're going to look at, you know, it's just like the policies. It
Right.
should be, again, when I look at the arrow that Jim had, and we're all going in the same direction, right? Is that, you know, these policies are coming up this year for review because that's what we've set. That's what the policy standard has been. You know, Mike and I have been working on, you know, someone will call him about an issue, an employee, and we'll look in the handbook, and then the handbook says something totally different than what we're actually doing.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Right.
That's been interesting,
So
isn't it?
again,
Yeah.
so again, I mean.
So we have policy and it's like,
Right.
what does
So,
matter?
so again, it's like the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing.
Right.
And how do we, if we
Yeah, it
can,
does.
if we can get that as, again, part of the planning stage, and then you talk about buildings, right? I mean, that is another thing that, again, needs a very, very big planning session and systematic, and that it's set up in year X, we're gonna do this, and we're gonna do this, right? So again, I think all that comes out of this structure way better
Yeah,
than what
and we
we
should
do.
spend our time on things that we're good at, or, you know, can become good
Higher value stuff.
So what's necessary, right?
at. Yeah.
So I guess I go, like, right now, I'm like, what do we do next, right? Because I don't know that we can just, I don't know, we can just say, yep, we're gonna do this. We're, you know, I mean, I think that there needs to be some planning, you know, that goes into when are we gonna fade out our own old committees? And when are we-
But
what's
one of
gonna
my
do?
suggestions would
Yes.
be that we create, you know, by leveraging the executive committee, you know, for planning with the administration, you know, to figure out how these two committees would start taking on responsibilities. But having that discussion done in the board of the, you know, board of the whole, so the first part might be the one committee, you know, taking on some of this work, you know, to do this through the balance of this year, with the idea that we'll work out, you know, all the details. We'll, you know, what's the charge for these committees? You know, what's the type of work? How might that be laid out? Remember, even Brett was suggesting, you know, every board meeting, we would talk about some segment of a strategic plan, right? You know, kind of a similar idea, but rather than dispersing and doing some of that work and coming back, let's maybe do this more collectively and not really launch it until next year, but we'd start this, you know, kind of working almost within the board of a whole.
Matt, you were gonna say something?
It's kind of, so obviously after the April election would be a thing that would pop in my mind, say, hey, that's when you should start implementing a new structure. However, I do think that it would be a good idea if, and I don't want to say if you're able to do it, or if we're able to do it, but like the executive committee, could you, and I think this is what Jim is referring to, could you start try to start creating a plan of how we would, you know, move forward with this kind of idea. And then the whole time for the next, you know, for the next 1 month or month, it's probably the election's coming up pretty soon, but still could be done, that we revisit this once a month with this special meeting. And then, you know, I don't want to make it drawn out too long, but we kind of build a plan on how we would implement this. And then maybe next year this time, then we pull into this. Now,
I don't know.
I don't know I don't know if that's what we want to do, but we have to understand there's elections, so.
But I would say there's something more important in election. And you just forfeit, I mean, you just gave it away, and that's the student. Right? The student should have you working right now for the student, not until the election comes up, right? You know, we know now what you've been working on. And the election is what it is. If this comes up, you're starting to develop, what do you want new board members? What are the skills they need to possess
Right, because
to drive what you've been working
be
since the
here,
beginning
and
of
we
this
don't
year?
even have an orientation plan for any new board member that comes on, if that happens. in April.
Yeah.
Yeah, regardless of what
So-
happens in the election.
Regardless,
we should be
it should be
looking
student
at how
focused,
we
you know, in
work.
terms of you know, a much higher level of involvement I mean, so that's, if you read the article, that's what says one of the problems is everybody's looking at election instead of what's right for kids.
Well, I kind of want to like read the material. I mean, the
You
stuff
just told me earlier today you didn't want to read anymore.
no, I said I didn't want to write
You
it.
are,
I said I didn't
you're
want to write
lying.
it. I didn't want to write anymore now. But I think we should, honestly, I've read a little of the book. I think I could, you know, really benefit from reading the whole thing and reading the stuff that Jim handed out. I think we need to have another sort of discussion in which we kind of come to a bit of a consensus about what we want a board to be.
That's,
And then have the executive committee produce a plan that we can talk about specifics. And then I think.
I mean,
then
is 2 weeks too early to have this on our general board meeting?
I was gonna kind of go in the opposite direction.
Oh, the opposite
Now.
direction. You still want to go to the park. I mean,
Well, the reason why,
park.
the reason why I say that is because if it was something to where the executive committee could meet and just decide where our committees are gonna fall inside these three committees, and then leave it up to the chairs to weed through what they're gonna cover, or at least that each individual committee. There's a lot of things that we cover, like we say, that are not necessary. Why are we doing? You know, that could be our initial meeting when we're getting involved in those things. It could be something to where the executive committee kind of puts it out, says, all right, guys, these committees are gonna kind of fall here. And that's gonna be your job now to take that over and figure out what exactly we feel is necessary. We can all come back together as a board and decide if that's a good idea or not, or whatever, but you know, at least then that individual committee, whether it's the structural or the operational, all that stuff, they could figure that out and be like, okay, well, normally we would cover this, but I feel this is something that's not necessary. Each person could bring it to the
Well,
table. and we could weed it.
my fear about that is, and they talk about it in this book,
Okay,
like, they talk about how, they set up their board exactly like this. I think it's in this part right here where it talks about each different committee.
And
They
that's
set it up exactly like that, and the guy came in and, you know, they were doing exactly what it was, but nobody really knew what it was, right? Which, and I'm not advocating at all for a consultant. But what I think the other trick is I don't think each chair would even really know, right? I mean, I really think it's something that we develop as a team and decide that and how do we know if we're effective or not effective, right? I mean, that's the
I
other
just,
part.
at the rate that we do things sometimes, I'd imagine that we should be able to get this set up by 2035.
Right.
Oh,
I don't disagree
This
with
board
you.
has moved pretty fast.
So we have different opinions on it. We haven't moved fast enough. In my opinion.
So the one thing I think that should be, that definitely needs to be addressed is there are policies. And policies that we do have dictate certain committees, so
Okay.
those need to be taken up, addressed, and looked at to make sure that we are in compliance to our own policies. The other thing that's to that is I think sometimes, you know, we even heard this in from public input sometimes, is that there's a lot of things going on. We've even been asked to slow down on some things. And there's a lot of uncertainty in our district in some areas. You know, by doing a big toss up like this, maybe it's just not, maybe I'm overthinking it, but it can add some confusion and uncertainty to people where they might just find those committees is these are, even though they are silos, maybe this is something that should be included with, next year's board, whatever that looks like. I'm just saying that, I don't want to add more uncertainty, more confusion. And maybe there isn't, maybe it's manageable. I guess I'm just kind of spitballing some caution on it that, I understand the need, that we have some overlapping areas. Those can be addressed in some things, but I'm cautious as to changing an entire model right away. So.
Kathy?
Yeah, I have to respond to that comment because I don't see it the same way. I guess, to me, it's, I don't think like our teachers and our students are affected by the way we actually run our meetings and what goes to what committee at a particular time. I think the assurance would have to come, or the reassurance to everyone, that we're still dealing with all of the issues and things that have come up at it's just looking different and by a different name. So we're still having building and grounds, it's still personnel, it's still curriculum, right? It's still budget and finance, but some things are lumped together. We're still dealing with all that same stuff. It's just that we're taking on our own, we're looking at ourselves thinking we can improve, and we're up for change too. We can't expect everybody else to change if we're not willing to do it ourselves.
Thank you.
And so, the fear, the hesitancy also means it's exciting at the same time, that there are new things ahead. And I don't think it's a bad thing for people in our district or in our community to see us going through that too and kind of leading the charge with it also. Or saying we're doing this all together and going through this all together. We're all taking us out of our comfort zones. We can make this a destination place. So we can make this a better, stronger district. And that's kind of how I see it now.
Yeah, I really like what you said there, because, when we think about, we're asking our staff to do a lot, right? Everyone's gonna have to kind of change the way they're doing things and why, right? We've been explaining that the whole time. It's all for what's best for the kids, and we should really hold ourselves to that same standard.
Yeah.
So if there is an opportunity to get more efficient and be more productive and to drive better outcomes for our kids, through the use of a more efficient governance structure, we should explore that fully. And if it's better, we should do it. And it shouldn't be a long conversation.
But I do get what Colin is saying though, because he's saying, at least correct me if I'm wrong, part of what you're saying is like, we don't want to create more like upheaval, unrest, uncertainty within our school system. So I think that's our job to be the reassurers that we're still doing everything. We're just doing it under different names and different, same committees, but like just, I don't want to say reorganized.
Well,
Right.
part of my reasoning and rationale is to that is, take for example, when somebody's talking about, hey, I would like to do X, Y, Z. All right. And if you've been in a system that has it has been structured where you're talking, I need to get my approved, I need to put it into finance. All right. So now they need to put it into finance. Well, all right. So now where do I go? Do I send it to the performing monitoring auditing? Do I send it to strategic operational planning? Who do I contact? And honestly, I think sometimes, just let me finish. So I think that sometimes people need to have at least some continuity in the midst of change. You can't just, I understand that that this is possibly even a better way of doing business. However, I think that there should be some caution and maybe slow to making some of those changes. If you just rip out, like, take for example, when Elon Musk, we'll just go with Elon Musk. I like the guy. I think but when he walked right in and just ripped out all sorts of different things, it was possibly it was too fast.
You're selling it, Tony.
Fine, I know I'm selling it to Tony, but I am saying, I think he even,
I'm just saying,
We
how
are
much
not
better
gonna
is,
talk
how much
about
better is
Elon
Twitter right
Musk.
now than it was.
Okay, this is important.
Yes.
Now that the way Colin puts it
And I have
that way, Colin is very good at grounding us. I'm very good at that. And I kind of thinking maybe the same thing too, because look, I asked you the question, where does our committee fall? And you still weren't even, I mean, and we're not, have no idea. So once it's in there, he makes a lot of sense.
That's because, do you know what's so difficult about that though, is because you keep trying to put our committees into these committees, thinking that our committees are the gold standard
Yeah.
and we have to keep them
Okay, yeah, you're
intact.
right too. See, now
That's
he
what
makes a lot of
makes it
sense.
so,
I understand, and that's the reason you got a challenge.
right?
I would have to say we are so woefully behind on so many of our things that we're doing. We're talking about who do we go to if something has to go to the finance committee? Is it not in the budget? Did we not consider that part of the plan up front? We're bringing these things at the last minute. You know? Oh, so we're planning as we go.
And we've had a lot of that.
And I
you know
only,
that,
I only
because-
say that, you know, just because that's where we're at, so we have to figure out, but that's not gonna happen overnight. We have to really give. Now, I would also say, because I'm really wanting to push you, we're understaffed right now until we fill some key positions. You know, so I'm somehow, I have a person who was just wondering, and where do you think we're gonna find the time to do this? I mean, you know, this change is hard. I mean, so there is a sensible thing about what you're saying. But I don't want our students to be, you know, the casualty here,
So,
because, you know, we're not moving the big items because we're so caught up in all the minutia.
so we're coming up on 2 hours, which is.
Yeah, right. Beautiful.
So my suggestion would be, and just, you know, that, we come back to this with a little more, I mean, because it sounds like everybody at least
Well, let's just go.
has a toe, if not the full body into this, okay? So that next time when we come, to our next meeting, that we will leave time to discuss this further and what a transition actually might look like. So that, because I think, you know, one of the things I was telling Jim before, it reminds me a lot of SFA, right? Like the concept and everything in paper seems really great, but what's the schedule gonna look like? And how many are we gonna need? And, you know, it's like, we don't have the details, and I think that's another thing that creates this anxiety. So
I don't know.
let
you
us come back with maybe some more details on what this looks like. Give you guys a chance to look at the book, especially chapter 8 that really talks about these committees and what we would be doing, you know, under those. And we'll see where we're at.
You know, when I first looked at this agenda item, I was absolutely, you know, a carbon copy of Colin. I said, oh my God, not another upheaval, not another, you know, and it's sort of like, oh, wow, this board is like, wants to change for change's sake, you know? So, but I'm at the point now where if you could show me meaningful, productive change, I could vote for that. Otherwise, I'm with Colin. You know, I don't think this is an emergency. But if you could, you know, if we can come up with meaningful change that could stand a chance of working,
I'm with you, Kerry.
you know, but so I don't think we need, I don't, honestly, as unlike Matt Spalding, I've never been in a hurry about any of this stuff.
Right.
You know, I'm the slow down guy, and then, you know, Kathy rips my ear off, and, you know, and Matt interrupts me again, and it's sort of like,
Wait
But
a
I
minute,
think-
interrupts. Come on, Carrie.
well, but I do think that, boy, just because it's on the agenda of a meeting, I don't think we have to do this.
Well,
You're the one that wanted to go to school for.
right, and I.
Oh, I wanted
and I-
to go forest, and I would maybe even vote for not doing it. But,
You know, I think what Carrie's saying is reasonable, right? We should probably not necessarily rush to this, but we should also act with urgency. And and we should also always have a mindset of continuous improvement. And I'm not sure about you guys.
Yeah.
I won't necessarily walk out of every meeting we have thinking, wow, that was just totally efficient. Like that.
Oh my
Oh,
gosh.
It's just great. And, you know,
Word of
moving
mouth.
these meetings along and we're just, you know, I'm just saying we should all have that mindset of how do we get better? Because ultimately, to Jim's point, you know, this is really, it's not about us. It's about why are we doing this, right? It's about kids. And how do we, you know, make this a destination district and drive achievement and all these other things we want to do. So, you know, I think these are good points. And I think, you know, let's take our time, but let's also not lose urgency on it.
Right, you know, we talked about this for, I don't know. Right, and I finally got Colin to say, okay, and now he's backtracking. But anyway,
That's good, good.
Also couldn't do that.
Yeah.
though. I think-
but I think, I mean, you guys are all right. I don't, this isn't something, this is a board decision. This isn't, you know, so
I think-
I'm challenging us to raise the bar because we've raised the bar everywhere else. So I'm challenging us to just think about it. And so we'll come back next time and we'll show a little bit more of what this actually might look like. And we'll go from there.
I agree with challenging the bar, raising the bar, challenging us. But I really kind of got to stick with the core value that Carrie mentioned, is meaningful change.
Well, something is not right when you two are on the same page.
Well,
That's all I'm
Yeah,
gonna say.
that's true. Yeah.
Or make
What's
dollars.
wrong with the universe? Yes, Colin, one more thing.
How hard and fast are you to this exact committee setup as far as what's outlined in the book? Would you guys be open to some changes to some of that if they were put forward?
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, yeah, but yes.
Okay. Just leaving it.
I make a motion that we adjourn.
I second that emotion, Carrie.
Any discussion on wanting to adjourn or not? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Go ahead, Tony.
Aye. Any opposed?
No, I felt like that was almost.
Thanks, everybody.
Before you leave,
Yeah.
I just need to verify before I register everybody who's going to the day at the Capitol. I had Matt Spalding, Colin Brunel, Carrie.
No, I'm not going.
You're not?
No.
Okay,
That's March 22nd.
it's
Yeah.
March 22nd.
Oh my God.
Colin, you're gonna come back to the.
I'll see.
Yeah.
Well, I have good.
Yeah.
Does anybody want a referendum yard sign? I can't bring them in the building, but I have some
Oh,
in my car.
yeah, I
I'll
got
take
one.
some.
Hey, there's a meeting on the 22nd.
If you want to send some outside the building, I'll grab a lunch.
How many do you want?
Yeah, I'd like to thank Lisa.
Tony's got that on his schedule.
I don't like her. Anything else?
Well, how many people?
I think a Wednesday.
I'll take a couple.
Pick a Wednesday. Well, no, well, okay.
Yes.
22nd. It's 8 AM.
Oh,
This is where we ran into the weeds with changing the meetings from the second to fourth Tuesday. So the 22nd is the fourth Wednesday of the month, but then